Hello and welcome back to the Airborne Lawyer YouTube channel, and welcome back to the TBM 930 World Tour, which picks up where we left off in the last episode here in Skagway in Alaska, a tiny little place just north of Juneau, which even at this time of year, it's currently August, appears to have snow and ice around, which is quite amazing. So this is quite a momentous flight. After 18 months on the TBM 930 World Tour of slowly but surely making my way around both North and South America, today we're going to be leaving the North American mainland for the last time as we start to head across the Pacific Ocean, which is the formidable hurdle that awaits us after Alaska. The TBM 930 World Tour started in Cambridge in the UK, which is where I'm from, and then it headed up over Iceland and Greenland, down through Canada and the east coast of the United States, and then across the Caribbean and all the way through South America, down the east coast and back up the west coast on the other side. We then went through Central America and up through California. And today we'll be leaving Skagway, heading up to Cordova, which is a little bit southeast of Anchorage, and then we'll be heading down the chain of islands known as the Aleutian Islands. I'll show you a bit more about the route in a few moments' time. So let's take a look at today's route, and our first stop will be a tiny airport to the west of Skagway called Cordova Municipal. It's just southwest of Anchorage, the state capital. Then we're heading out to the island of Unalaska, where we'll be landing into Dutch Harbour, and then we're flying to the furthest point west in the whole of the United States, which is Attu Island, at the end of the Aleutian Islands. Okay, so let's get underway from Skagway. It is once again extremely snowy. Now I don't know if there might be a slight issue with how it's rendering the weather here, because it's meant to be, looking at my primary flight display, it's meant to be 13 degrees centigrade outside, and yet we have got a fairly substantial coating of snow on the ground. At least on departure this time we have some lights to show us where the runway is. Take a look at the previous episode to see the slightly sketchy landing we had when we came into Skagway. It is quite a short runway, so I'm just going to pull up here, get the power up, and then release the foot brakes. And after takeoff I'm going to be heading to the left to gain some altitude rather than heading straight towards that mountain in front of us. So here we go, let's get the power up. And away we go. Just turned on the landing lights as well, just as we're taking off. Better late than never. And we are looking for 90 knots. There it is, and away we go. So positive rate, gear up. Farewell to Skagway. Tiny little place, but very beautiful, very scenic. I'm glad that we have come out to see it. Something a little bit different. So I'm going to do an initial climb out to at 140 knots, so on flight level change mode. We're just going to keep the current heading going as well for the moment, just whilst we gain enough altitude to get past these mountains. If I look at the terrain map in the centre, a lot of red there, so I don't want to be going anywhere near that. I would need to be climbing extremely quickly, and it's not worth the risk. I probably wouldn't get over it wouldn't get up to the right altitude to get over these mountains in time. So we're going to head down this little inlet. You can just see on the map that little patch of blue, or climb safely whilst we're over the water, and then we will turn to the right and pick up our route up towards Anchorage. As I say, we aren't actually flying to Anchorage, we're flying to Cordova Municipal, which is an airport a little way outside of Anchorage, and it's meant to be one of the most scenic and spectacular airports in all of Alaska. It will need to be going places to beat the scenery of Skagway, in my opinion, which has been absolutely beautiful. Start to see the tops of those mountains now, so we'll climb maybe up to about 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and then I'm going to make a right hand turn and we'll pick up our planned flight route. If you take a look at the center screen here, you can see that solid pink line. That's the course we should be heading on in order to continue on our way to Cordova, and if at all possible I want to avoid going into these clouds, so I'll be making a right hand turn fairly soon. I think just looking over in this direction, there's a nice gap in the clouds there that ideally I'd like to continue my climb through. So obviously I'm just doing this entirely visually at the moment, and I still don't have the autopilot on. I'm just flying this entirely by hand. 7,500 feet now, and just aiming for that nice patch of blue sky to avoid going through cloud that is too thick. Going through thick cloud, there's a risk of icing and risk also of precipitation, which could be a bit risky. So you can see the mountains receding away there. Skagway is just down there somewhere, I think. That's where we've come from. Now that we are climbing, I am just going to put on the weather radar actually, just to make sure these clouds are safe to fly through. So just looking over here on the right hand side of my navigation display, you can see a little bit of orange just in front of us, green and orange. It's fine to fly through green. Ideally we want to avoid the amber orange coloured clouds, but we're climbing nice and quickly, so you can already see how that amber colour is receding, and there's a nice little gap just in the middle there, which I'm currently targeting to fly straight through. So it's all coming together nicely right now. We're over 10,000 feet, so I'm now going to turn off the landing lights. Do that down here. And I will speak to you in a few moments' time once we're on our approach into Cordova Municipal. Okay, so welcome back to the flight, and we are now on approach into Cordova Municipal. Let me just give you a quick update on where we are. So this is what the flights look like so far. I've been flying on this on VATSIM, so this is how it looks on SimAware. Not a particularly long flight, just over 300 miles or so. And if we take a look at Google Maps, because frankly the charts I have on Navigraph are slightly pointless on this particular flight because there aren't any for the airport that we're trying to fly to. So looking at Google Maps, here's Anchorage. We're just a little bit south, what is it, south-east? We're heading into Cordova. Okay, and what I want to do, ideally, is land on this very interesting municipal airstrip just outside Cordova. If that doesn't work, I'm going to try landing here instead, which is the main airport in Cordova. It's not very far away. Now let's just jump back in the sim so you can see how that applies to what we're doing here. Well, just zooming in on the navigation display, you can see that airport there, PACV. That is the main airport in Cordova, which we will land at if we can't get into the municipal airport. And you can just see the pink line heading out to a waypoint called CKU. You know you're in trouble if you can't even get a full 4-digit ICAO code, which is the case here. Well, not so much in trouble, but certainly going to something pretty small and sketchy, I think. So where that pink line ends at CKU, that is where we're headed to. Now I'm just going to fly around this headland here and try and make an approach into Cordova Municipal. Now the big issue to start with seems to be one of visibility. So I'm currently at 4,000 feet. Let's take ourselves down to 2,000 feet and see if we can see anything more. And I'm just going to continue making my way as best I can around this headland. As I say, just literally doing a loop around this little bit here and then back in to the airport. Starting to hear rain on the windscreen, so I take it the weather isn't great. This looks dreadful, doesn't it? I haven't made this approach before into the airport. I've not practiced. I don't know if this is going to be achievable in conditions like this. I suspect it won't be, quite frankly. This is not weather to be flying visually, but if I can just get out of this cloud, we might still be able to manage it. So let's just drop down a little bit further, just down to 1,500 feet. See, there we are starting to... Right, we're starting to see something through the cloud now. So let's just... try and drop out of this cloud. I am using my terrain map quite extensively here, so I can't go where it's red. I've got to be very careful if I go where it's yellow or amber, and I should be able to clear the land which is marked in green. So that's a helpful guide. This weather is horrific. Absolutely horrific. It's kind of low cloud and fog. So I cannot rule out having to divert at this stage over to the main airport in Cordova, but I'd like to avoid it if I can. Still on autopilot at the moment. What I want to try and do is just maintain visibility with the headland, so you can see it over there. Oh dear, this is just ghastly weather. Oh, the rain has started again. Oh dear, this is a bit risky, isn't it? A bit dicey. Barely visual. You can just make out the outline of the hills there. Just over to our right hand side. Okay, a little bit clearer again. Obviously this cloud cover is very localized. You can see a bit more over that way. So let's take a right hand turn again and follow this landscape round. So for me, I've said many times on the channel, but for me, flight simming is at its best if you do everything as realistically as possible. including weather, because this is what it would be like if I was doing this in real life. It adds to the challenge of the whole thing. Why do something when it's super easy when you can do it and it's harder and more challenging? Right, I want us to follow this so that the land we can see over on our right hand side, I want to be running along the top of that. So that's why I keep turning to the right here. If you're wondering why I'm not using my flight yoke here, it's because I'm actually controlling it on the autopilot for the time being. It is really, really murky out there. And all I want to do is just stay visual as much as possible with this headland. This is really tricky. I cannot rule out a diversion. Hold on to your seats here. Let's take ourselves down now to 1,000 feet. See if we can drop out of this latest round of low cloud and mist. I'm going to really start slowing up. Let's just take a look down here at the map. The airport is just over here. I know it's quite hard to see. Just CKU, just over there. So I'm really going to slow up actually at this point. It's coming at us quite quickly. I can hardly see anything. Autopilot now off. Your damper is off. Flight directors are off. I've just got to have a go at doing this visually. Okay, so this has got to be the town just over here, I think. Cordova. Yeah, I can just about see Cordova at this point. I'm just going to head. I can just see the kind of dip there, which I'm going to go straight through the middle of and see if I can see this runway the other side. But now I want to take this as slowly as possible. So landing gear now, down, flaps fully out. I'm just going to take a speed all the way down now to 80 knots. Sorry, 85 knots. And I think that might be it. There's just like a whitish strip just in front of us, just here. That is it. That is it. Okay, so I can do this. Now, just have to hope that this is long enough to take a TBM 930. It looks okay, I think. Can't really see much of a runway, but I think I'm just about over it now. Got to get this down. Oh, that was a thump there. And full reverse thrust. And hard on the brakes because I could just see a tree right in front of me there. Right. Oh, that was something else. Okay. Kind of wondering if I'd have rather have gone to Anchorage, to be honest, but clearly that wouldn't have been quite as much fun. So no wonder this airport gets ranked as being one of the most intense landing strips to try out in the entirety of Alaska. I mean, there's not really anywhere to go and park in, is there? So I think what we're just going to do instead is go and have a look outside. So I'll be completely honest and say that in the end I had to cheat slightly and manually lift some of the weather out of the sim in order to just be able to see this, because I tried a few times after my landing in Cordova to load up the sim and see what the weather looked like, but every single time it was absolutely shocking. So this isn't real world weather at this exact moment. But once the weather's a little bit clearer, you can see it's a very pretty place, very small place as well. It's home to just 2,500 people. But the airport's extremely important within that context, because Cordova is not connected to Alaska by road, so they are entirely dependent on ferries and aeroplanes to maintain a connection with the rest of Alaska and indeed the world. And the airport handles over 8,000 aircraft movements each year. It feels like a very, very peaceful place, lots of trees, lots of wildlife and beautiful scenery. Although tragically, back in March 1989, an oil tanker ran aground just northwest of Cordova, which had a heavy impact on local wildlife. It was cleaned up shortly afterwards, but apparently there are lingering effects to this day, such as reduced bird populations. Time now to jump back in the cockpit and continue our journey out into the Aleutian Islands. Okay, so here we are back at the end of the runway. The weather is pretty much as bad as it was when we arrived, and now we've got to safely depart from this treacherously short airstrip with very, very limited visibility. So I'm just going to go straight ahead and climb as quickly as I can. So I'm going to set it to a flight level change climb at quite a low speed, which will mean we'll have a decent rate of climb. And before all of that, I'm going to keep my feet on the foot brakes so that we don't roll forward as I increase the throttle. So I'm going to put the throttle all the way up, make sure we've got full torque before I release the foot brakes. You can see the plane straining to pull away at this point, and away we go. And it's now a race to get to 90 knots before we pull back and take off. So far so good. 50, 60, 70. It's starting to get a bit tight. 80. There we go. Pulled up very slightly early, but we have managed to escape the runway at Cordova. That's the main thing. So the weather is a bit better, to be fair. You can see the sun trying to poke through. It looks like we're going to break out of these clouds fairly soon. What I'm just doing at the moment is a 100 knot climb, which gives me a nice rate of climb there, about 1,500 feet a minute. And I'm just looking to clear those hills just in front of us. If I zoom in on my navigation display over here, you can see it's a little bit clearer over to the right hand side. Colour starting to bleed away now from that map as we get above the more elevated terrain. In fact, on my primary flight display just here, I can also see that flatter terrain just here, so I'm just going to fly through that gap. So now climbing well above 3,000 feet, which was my initial planned altitude. Let's go a little bit higher. Let's take it up to 10,000 feet and see what the weather's looking like up there. And continuing that climb for the time being at, we'll keep it at 110 knots, that looks good. And I will stick the autopilot on at this point as well. You can see the pink line just over here on the navigation display. That is our flight route, which is going to take us to Dutch Harbour. I've had to set that to go from the main airport just south of Cordova, because the municipal airport we've just taken off from was not included on SimBrief when I did the flight plan. So that tells the story. Now just turn to the south so that we can pick up that pink line. And hopefully at some point soon we're going to break out of this murk and into some bright sunshine. keep the climb going now. Go up nice and high. I'm going to take it all the way up to 30,000 feet. As we leave the North American mainland for the last time on the TBM 930 World Tour, this is going to be one of our longer flights. But I will now time-lapse the cruise, and I will speak to you in a few moments' time when we're on our approach into Dutch Harbour. So, welcome back to the flight. We are now well into our descent. We're just levelling off actually at 4,000 feet, and just about 25 miles north of Unalaska. So just going to quickly show you over here what the lie of the land is on the approach. So we're flying into Dutch Harbour, Unalaska Airport, right here, and the winds are currently blowing at 350 degrees at 8 knots. Now that means I'm going to land on the northbound runway into Unalaska, and I can give you a bit more detail on that right now. If I just show you a map of the airport, just here, we will be landing into runway 31. I'm going to do this entirely visually. I am on VATSIM, I have been for the entire flight in fact, but there are no VATSIM controllers all the way out here in the Aleutian Islands, so I will do this entirely visually. A couple of other things to just pick up on here, just looking at the approach charts. So we're looking at an airport elevation of just 22 feet, so basically sea level. And obviously this is a chart I'm not really going to follow because I'm just going to do it visually, as I say, but helpful to know that we're going to descend essentially down to sea level. Helpful particularly because if you look here at the map, at the navigation display, you can see that there's some pretty interesting peaks out here, so you can just see almost certainly some volcanic mountains just over there, and in fact you can see them now out the window as well. So just descending down now to 3,000 feet. I'm going to do a visual pass over the runway and then make my approach into runway 31, which should mean that we are largely descending against the wind, or largely approaching against the wind. It feels really remote. I mean, even being in Alaska, just flying into various locations in Alaska that we visited so far on the tour, they have felt quite remote, but at least they are physically connected to the North American mainland. We are now, you know, a fair distance out into the Pacific, which kind of really puts things in context. Just quickly show you over here as well on the SimAware map. You can see just how far we've come, and you know, we are already making decent headway across the top of the Pacific Circle. An important transition for the TBM 930 World Tour as we finally leave North America. And indeed the Americas, because of course I've toured through South America as well. Let's now descend down to 2,000 feet, keep that descent going. Again, we are now encountering a fair amount of cloud, which isn't ideal, but such is life. I think we're starting to get some half decent visibility again. Still looking very snowy out here, which is quite surprising. I am flying on real world weather, or should be, so this should be an accurate representation of the weather out in Unalaska today. I have also Google searched how to pronounce Unalaska, because I didn't know, is it, you know, Unalaska, Unalaska, something like that. It is just apparently Unalaska. Fair to say that Alaska has done nothing if not present some very, very challenging approaches, and this looks to be another one. I'm going to descend down now to 1,500 feet. Getting pretty low given the terrain out here. Plenty of fuel if we need to do a go around. I'm now going to turn off the autopilot, the yaw damper and the flight directors though, and fly this by hand. Just taking it nice and slow, nice and easy, levelling off at 1,500 feet, and that looks to me like a runway. So we'll make our approach into that airport now. We're just going to do a little loop round here. Going to slow right down, and we're going to land just down there.
Landing gear. Landing
Yeah.
gear. Landing gear.
Let's get those down. Definitely want the wheels down. And we can get the flaps out as well. Okay, so coming down to 1,000 feet now, so pretty low. And I'm going to get full flaps out and take this really slowly because I've got to loop all the way round. This looks like a tiny, tiny little place. Nice and level, just holding about 750 feet at the moment, 100 knots, very slow, relatively speaking, and certainly very low as well. But just pulling back on that speed even more now, as I go into a 180 degree turn to pick up runway 31. I think my altitude feels about right to be making an approach from this distance. Obviously just dropping down a bit there, down to about 600 feet, so I've now got the runway in sight. You can see my shadow there across the ice.
500.
And I will finish off the approach, as I say, entirely by sight. Wow, that's really cool. I haven't had that before actually with the shadow. That's really nice, I like that. Again, part of the reason I'm doing a world tour in the TBM 930 is that flexibility afforded by a plane this small and this nimble. I wouldn't want to try doing this unrehearsed without practice in, you know, a 737 or something. That would be really hard. Here we are. It's looking quite nice actually. It's certainly better than our last landing. There we are, very good. Bit of a bounce, but I'll live with that. And we will do a U-turn on the runway and taxi into parking. So let's just do that. Okay. As I say, very, very nimble. The TBM can literally turn it on a pinhead. Just taking a look at the chart here, you see I've just landed at the end of runway 31 there. We're just going to taxi over to the general aviation parking just over here. Just about make out the line of the taxiway here. But call me cavalier, but I'm just going to pull up here and shut the plane down. And whilst we shut the plane down, refuel and get ready to head on further down into the Aleutian Islands, let's get the drone out and go and have a look at Unalaska. So Dutch Harbour is on the island of Amaknak in Unalaska, and today it is an important hub in the US fishing industry, with more than $1 billion worth of fish harvested each year. But back in the day, back in June 1942, this was a very different scene indeed. Dutch Harbour was the location of the Battle of Dutch Harbour in the Second World War, and it's one of the very few sites in the US, along with Pearl Harbor of course, which was subjected to aerial bombardment by a foreign power. And actually, in reading up on the Aleutian Islands and making this YouTube video, I have discovered that the Aleutian Islands, though very remote, though very sparsely populated, they have played an important strategic part in history. That's true for Dutch Harbour, that's true also for Kiska Island, which we're going to be passing on our next flight, and it's also true for Attu Island, the furthest point west in the US where we're going to next. Okay, so it's a nice bright morning here in Dutch Harbour. I'm just going to pull back onto runway 31 now, in readiness for takeoff. Still plenty of ice on the runway. We've got our landing lights on and our strobes. Flaps are all set. So let's go. We have at least a little bit more runway this time than the previous takeoff. There's 80 knots, 90 knots even, and away we go. Positive rate of climb, gear up. Pretty spectacular, I have to say. Just going to pick up the speed a bit here. Looking to do a 140 knot climb. Just going to start the turn now to the left. Going to be heading west and very slightly south. As we pick up our route. Got a nice 140 knot climb. I'm going to activate the autopilot at this point. And I'm also going to go into nav mode. So we will follow our planned route And there we go. Farewell to Unalaska, farewell to Dutch Harbour. Tiny, remote, and very, very beautiful. And we are now going to head even further west to the furthest point west in the entirety of the United States. So I will now time-lapse the cruise, and I will speak to you in a few moments' time when we are on our approach into Ericsson Air Base. So welcome back to the flight, and welcome to the farthest reaches of Alaska. We're into the very last bits of the Aleutian Islands now, and we are shortly going to see the island which is still technically in the US and is the bit of the US that is furthest to the west. And it goes without saying we are much, much closer to Russia out here. So let me just quickly bring you up to speed with where we are. Just looking here at Google Maps, you can see the Bering Sea just here, and we've followed the Aleutian Islands all the way down to Shemya Island just here, which we're just about to fly over as I speak. And Attu Island is just beyond Shemya, and I was initially planning to land right here at Ericsson Air Station on Shemya, but in fact when I was just having a look around Attu Island, I found this tiny airstrip here. So I've made a change of plan whilst flying. Literally just down there, that is Ericsson Air Base, where I was planning on landing, but whilst we've been in the air, I've decided that we're going instead to fly on to Attu Island, and we'll land there instead. You can see Attu Island, it's just in front of us, just probably about 30 miles in front of us, so not too far to go. But that will then mean on this flight we can say truthfully that we have gone to the very furthest point west in the entirety of the United States. Let's just take a quick look outside. So that's Ericsson. Looks pretty basic, I have to say. To say this is remote is an understatement. There really is not much out here at all. So I've just come down to 5,000 feet, and we'll just continue the journey across to Attu Island now. And really, it's just wilderness out here. There is in fact a designated area of Alaskan wilderness covering some of the Rat Islands, which we flew past a short while ago, well, about 45 minutes or so ago, and I think also covering some of these islands here, which ironically are called the Near Islands. But whilst it is a wilderness, they have featured in world history. Attu Island and also Kiska Island, which we flew past just under an hour ago, did feature in the Pacific battles of the Second World War, which is quite interesting. Not much here. I suspect not much even to really, create a settlement from. It would be very hard to live out here, I expect, but obviously they are strategically very, very important. Now on the TBM 930 World Tour, I've flown a long way now. I've been doing this for well over 18 months. It's just something I do when I get a little bit of free time. I just decide to go somewhere I've never been before on flight sim, flying the fantastic turboprop, which is the TBM 930. And this flight out to Attu Island is symbolic because it is going to be the last bit of North America that we're going to see on the tour. I left the UK and flew up to Iceland, then over to Greenland, and then landed into Goose Bay in North America. And I've spent much of the time since then, when I've done episodes of the TBM 930 World Tour, I've spent basically the entire time going round North and South America, and it's been absolutely fantastic. It's been so scenic, and I've learned so much about these great continents, and I've flown into all these different airports which I've never previously flown into on Flight Simulator or in real life. And I'm now leaving the Americas behind at long last and making my way across the Pacific. Obviously a relatively narrow stretch of the Pacific, a relatively safe stretch of the Pacific as well, up in the Bering Sea. Had we had an emergency, there's an Aleutian island fairly close by, all the way down this chain of islands, and it's not very far beyond here that we then go into Russian airspace. But it does feel quite weird to now be leaving the Americas behind, and it certainly makes the other extreme of the half of the Pacific rim that we've done so far, namely the very bottom of South America, it makes that feel like a very, very long way away. So here we are, fast approaching Attu Island now, and we're looking out for Attu Station, which is that landing strip we took a look at on Google Maps just a short while ago. Let me just show you that once again. So we are literally just off the coast here somewhere at the moment. It shouldn't be too difficult to find the landing strip. What I plan to do is just do a little bit of a flyby the island, given this is the farthest point west in the entirety of the United States. Interestingly, it is a little less icy out here. Now, I don't know how accurate the weather was rendered back in Unalaska when we left Dutch Harbour. Obviously it was still very snowy, very icy. Much of the harbour itself was apparently iced up. Here we're looking at quite a bit of green, so presumably it is somewhat milder. But the weather has been pretty unforgiving all the way down here. The headwinds have been something else. We've had headwinds of well in excess of 100 knots at certain points, which has meant that this flight down has taken rather longer than expected. It's a 733 nautical mile flight, so that's around about 850 miles. And it's taken quite a while to get down here, actually, because those winds have been up against us all the way. So this is it, the last outpost of the US. Still got the autopilot on here at the moment. Just going to survey the landscape a little bit and make sure we can see where we're planning to land. I would have initially planned to fly out here had I seen this place on my Navigraph charts, but without a word of a lie, it's not on there. Take a look at Navigraph charts, it just looks like I'm flying in wilderness. There's nothing there. The landing strip is just down here somewhere, I think, but you wouldn't know it to look at the chart. But once I'd had a little look around on Google Earth and I saw the strip, I thought, yep, let's go for that instead. Let's go all the way to Attu Island, and I can see it down there now, so that's good. At the moment, the winds are still kind of head on, and it looks like there's actually 2 runways down there. So, yeah. I think I'm probably going to fly onto this runway though. I'll fly onto that one nonetheless. There's no markings on that one, so I'm not quite sure what condition that runway is going to be in. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a circuit here, and then we'll come back in, and it's going to be a crosswind, but I'm going to land on that runway just down there, which has just disappeared under the wing, and I will land facing south. I am actually on VATSIM, but it's all very quiet. There's no one out here. There are no controllers online. It's just me. Gives you a slight sense of what it must be if you're based out this way, presumably with the military. But it looks pretty sensational down there. Just untouched wilderness. A strategic outpost, but otherwise this is another bit of land that humans haven't really got any need for. So this is where the United States ends. This is it. You can't go any further west and still be in the US. So let's head to the south, and we're going to start making our way back into the airport now. Still a bit of ice and snow at the top of those hills, but it looks much warmer here than it did back in Dutch Harbour, there's no doubt about it. Do now is just descend down to 4,000 feet, currently at 5,000, so let's just take it down a little bit. Let's do that on a flight level change descent, so just pull back on the speed a little. See the airport just over there in the distance at the moment. Absolutely spectacular scenery, and the Pacific looks mercifully quite calm today. I suppose is this it's kind of the Pacific or it's Bering Sea. I'm not sure where one starts and where the other ends, but it looks quite calm out there. Now, continue the descent down actually to 3,000 feet, and let's turn left 90 degrees now, 110 degrees. It's not that long ago on the tour that I was flying into some pretty big cities. You know, we've been into Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego in relatively recent flights. This feels very different, but very, very beautiful. So I'm just keeping an eye out on this left-hand side here to see the airport again. And we'll keep that descent going. We'll go down to 2,000 feet now. So there is the airport. And interestingly, I have just got a fuel low warning come on. No great surprise after how hard the TBMs had to work against those winds to get here. We did have the tanks 80% full on leaving Dutch Harbour, but we are now really quite low on fuel. And I'm going to turn another 90 degrees now to 020 degrees, and this is now basically our downwind leg. I'm starting to pull back on the speed as well now. Just see the airport nice and clearly over there, and we're running parallel to the runway at this point in time. Let's take it down now to 1500. I have no charts for this, so I'm doing this by sight. I'm just making it up as I go along, really. It looks like a nice long runway, so that's helpful. And once we reach 1500 feet, I'm really going to pull back on the speed now. There we go. Time to turn off the autopilot, the yaw damper and the flight directors. I'm just going to do this entirely by hand from this point on. Good visibility at least. I wouldn't want to try this without decent visibility, because I have no instrument landing system or other guidance systems to rely on here. So let's get the wheels down. One thing which is quite difficult to judge here is what my altitude should be. I'm on a base leg at the moment. Let's get the flaps out. That will buy us more time, means we can fly nice and slowly. So I'm now on full flap and now all set to land just as soon as I've turned finals. Looks like there's a bit of a bulge there right in front of the runway, which we're just going to have to be careful of. You can just see it coming into view here, look. This hill right in front of the runway. So the radio altimeter there was actually just responding to the hill which was right beneath us. This is now looking quite nice. We can just coast our way in from here. We have now flown into a soft headwind, which is good. Very nice. Okay, I'll just bring the flaps in, and I'm going to do a U-turn here on the runway, which we can do, given we're just in the TBM. There we go. And let's just head back and park up. So I've brought the flaps in. Can turn off the pitot heats now. Turn off the bleeds. Now, obviously this is just Microsoft Flight Sim. I don't know if you'd have marshals in real life at Attu Station. If you did, you'd have to feel sorry for these guys. I mean, there can't be that much work for them to do. What a lonely place to be an airport marshal. And there we go. So thank you very much indeed for watching this episode of the TBM 930 World Tour, the momentous episode in which we have finally concluded our journey through North and South America and reached the furthest extremity, which can still be called the United States. After this, we're going to be continuing our tour around the Pacific Rim with a journey into Russia and then down to Tokyo in Japan. And alongside all of that, look out for more short and long-haul flying here on the Airborne Lawyer YouTube channel, on both Prepare 3D V5 and on Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. And I will speak to you again very, very soon. Thanks again for watching, and please click subscribe if you haven't already done so. Bye for now.